Everyone remembers their first time, right? You just never forget it. Doesn't matter who it was with, it will always stick with you. Everyone has that first experience. And mine was with Crash Bandicoot. And it was special. Don't give me that look. What did you think I was talking about? But in all seriousness, there are just so many video games out there. You play it, enjoy it, and move on. But I think everyone remembers picking up the sticks for the very first time. And my first video game was Crash Bandicoot on the PlayStation 1. My family had taste, man. My first game ended up being one of the video game mascots of all time. A PlayStation mascot that is now under Xbox, which is just crazy to think about, really. But he was the PlayStation man for a good while. And PlayStation have had many platformer mascots. Jak and Daxter, Sly Cooper, Ratchet and Clank, and most recently, Astrobot. Today though, we begin our journey of looking back at the franchises that have defined 30 years of PlayStation for me. So, I hope you'll join me on that journey, as once a week, all the way up until the 30th anniversary, I'll be talking about a particular franchise that made me resonate with PlayStation. So, if that sounds up your alley, consider subscribing and sticking around for it. Otherwise, let's talk about Crash Bandicoot, my first ever video game. Crash Bandicoot being my first ever video game means I was a young boy, man. There's a lot of memories I have, but also being too young to remember. So when I was a kid, one thing that I was told is that sometimes my parents would have to put Crash Bandicoot on the telly so that I would open my mouth and eat. Otherwise, if Crash wasn't on, I'd refuse to eat. We've all been there, right? I guess that it was just that good. My jaw was opened in sheer awe of how good this video game was. And that's how they got food down my mouth. But when I was actually old enough to get on the sticks and play for myself, I'd be a bit of a pain in the ass. To the point where we basically had a PlayStation 1. And if I was good, my family would quote unquote arrange someone to bring it round and I'd get to play. I.e., they'd have it upstairs, they'd take it outside, and then they would quote unquote bring someone who would drop it off and then give it to me. Look, Crash Bandicoot is a great game. How could we not all be obsessed? It was just such an exciting time back then. And it had everything that makes a top-notch platformer that I appreciate. A cast of characters full of charisma and charm, the most in-your-head kind of music that you just find yourself humming over and over. And most importantly, he's got those trademark moves. The spin, the slam, even the jump, or the whole hulbaga as you obtain the mask. But most importantly, the dance. Even now that in 2024, Crash just sticks out. So much that even had he not been iconic, I think he still would be now. I really do believe that. For as incredible as Astrobot was this year by Team Asobi, it was missing that one clear thing for me, which was that iconic identity of the characters outside of just Astrobot. When you think of Crash Bandicoot, you don't just think of Crash. You think of Coco, you think of Cortex, you think of the weird bosses like Ripperoo and Tiny Tiger. Like, Tiny Tiger just looks ridiculous. He's got the most bro culture gym physique you've ever seen in your life. Ripperoo, Dr. and Jin, and Neo Cortex, like, they all look so weird, but they add so much personality to these games and genre, despite them just being a boss fight who you barely talk to. Of course, as the games progressed, they'd taunt and they'd mock you in their area of levels and you'd see a bit more of them, but they were always iconic no matter what. And then seeing them all in 4K or textured up is a remarkable sight. And that brings me to my next point. Video game preservation is extremely important, so to have the insane trilogy of Crash Bandicoot matters a lot. The thing that I love most perhaps is when you go back and you play a video game from when you were younger, you often look at it through that kind of nostalgic and rose-tinted lens. Except, playing the insane Crash trilogy is a experience of playing the game exactly how you remember it. And you don't often get that. Playing the Insane Trilogy is the feeling of playing Crash how you remember it. Both how it looks and how it plays. It's such a faithful remake that it feels just perfect as someone who grew up on Crash Bandicoot, Cortex Strikes Back, and of course Warped. I can't speak for what video games were like back then, but the funny thing is that When the Insane Trilogy released first in 2017, it felt as good as most platformers on the market still. That's a testament to how good the original was in creative mechanics and level design, but also the level of care that was placed into it by Vicarious Visions in the remaster and remake. I still love the feeling of booting up the Insane Trilogy because for anyone who played that original when they were kids, it feels like coming home.
Developed by Vicarious Visions. It's Crash Bandicoot!
Of course, I'm talking about the original trilogy of Crash like an obsessed Star Wars fan who refuses to acknowledge the rest of the films. It did go downhill for a while, okay? Some weird action-focused games that I still enjoyed, particularly on the Nintendo Wii. But then, Crash 4, It's About Time was coming, which, what a name by the way. And that delivered, man. The Insane Trilogy set Crash up to be back in the modern day era. And it was so good to see that a Crash Bandicoot game could exist and thrive in modern day gaming, where AAA platformers are becoming more and more of a rarity. The ability to play not just as Crash and Coco, but as Dr. Cortex, Dingo Dial, and Torna. It added variation to an already established foundation, allowed them to be more experimental in mechanics than just the skills that Crash and Coco possessed, which allowed the series to progress even further. What Crash Bandicoot 4 provided was a legacy of Crash Bandicoot. Often, we look back at games like I said with rose-tinted glasses and think, yeah, just make another one but modern. But that doesn't always work. Crash 4 proved that in this case, it can, and it really solidified his status as one of the all-time video game characters. At least to me, I don't care what you have to say. I want to talk more about the originals though, because that's where the PlayStation legacy is for me. There's some truly iconic levels, mechanics, and moments in Crash. I think part of the charm of Crash Bandicoot, despite the frustration of constantly dying, is the personality and the hilarious nature of what it is to die. Like just dying and getting the whoa! And it just, no matter what it was, so whether you're getting hit by a spike and you turn into an angel, crushed by a boulder and you're getting flattened, burned by fire and you get torched, it's just weirdly like rewarded to be killed in a video game. It kind of reminds me of dying in the Batman Arkham games where you'd get some fun dialogue from an enemy beating you, but these deaths were just pure entertainment as a kid. I'd remember just purposefully killing myself just so I could laugh at some of the funny animations and things that happened. I think we often forget with video games sometimes that we're so focused on critiquing and what's wrong with a game that at the very basic, fundamental level of video games, they're just a form of entertainment for people to enjoy. There is of course the levels that you weren't purposefully dying and yet you still couldn't stop dying. The High Road, Slippery Climb, and of course, Stormy Ascent. Fuck you, okay? Fuck you, Stormy Ascent. Again, it comes back to being iconic. Many platformers have world names and level names, and yet, most I can never name. Just like the villains here, these levels are ingrained into my brain, you know? But then again, that feeling of overcoming High Road as a kid, I felt like a champion. The excitement of doing it was unmatched. Honestly, I think my favourite levels will always be the riding levels. Hog Wild and Whole Hog in the first game was probably what was on the telly to get my mouth open so that I'd eat some food. I loved how they evolved over the trilogy too. I think the one that will be the iconic one to me is Snow Go. I was obsessed with polar bears as a kid, and I reckon that purely stemmed from my fascination with playing with the polar bears in Crash Bandicoot. It's always a little look back to the camera that Crash gives before he jumps on. You just don't forget these things. The evolution of this throughout the series too, with Tiger that Coco jumps on in 3, or even getting access to the water boat and performing tricks. It was just so cool to watch these games evolve, despite never losing that foundation. I always loved the sense of knowing what kind of level you're about to head into beforehand, whether that was having the polar bear in front of the level to signify what kind of level it was, or having a bit of a biome preview depending on where you were. Of course, Crash is predominantly a kids focused game, but that doesn't mean it didn't have its tougher sections within that to really challenge every player. Having to smash into every box in a level in order to get a gem, or have all the boxes fly down upon you and just smash into Crash. The secret levels where you'd have to collect 3 Cocos, or you'd stumble on it through jumping in a pit. These mini puzzles would be even as simple as counting the amount of jumps on an apple crate so you don't fall, or hitting TNT at a certain moment so you blow the box up but not yourself. The boss fights too, just so engaging, always being a little mini puzzle before you'd strike back, and to be honest with you, the more thought-provoking than half the shit you learn in school, let me tell you that. Testing whether you need to spin on an enemy, jump on an enemy, or use their weapons against them. Those levels now, like going back and playing them recently, despite them clearly being aimed for kids, they're just very engaging because you feel like a champion, you feel smart for working out how to beat these bosses, even though they're very simplistic in their nature. And that despite saying next to nothing half the time, you'd still remember these bosses' names and what they did, and it was fantastic. Of course, I can't talk Crash without talking Crash Team Racing. If Crash Bandicoot is my first platformer, Crash Team Racing is where I developed my desire to always win, where I got competitive. Let me tell you, I don't care who I'm playing, I ain't letting nobody win in Crash Team Racing. The best part for me about any of these kind of races is that you never pick the main characters. You play so much as Crash in these games, you want that extended universe lore, you know what I mean? So as a result, you always pick the weird little guys. I'm pretty sure I was a Tiny Tiger main. Maybe that's why I'm a gym rat now. Probably is. I was like, fuck yeah, I want that physique. But the races were just so much fun as a kid. Cycling through the different stats and weapons, it just never failed to be a fantastic time. And that's what Crash Bandicoot is. Even all these years later, and how many levels I've played over the years, it's a game that puts a smile on your face. Despite being owned by Xbox now, it's still the iconic PlayStation platformer character to me. It kills me that Crash 5 was due to be a Spyro and Crash team up. I needed that. We needed that. But to have this collection always available is like getting back a favourite childhood toy. Crash Bandicoot was the beginning of my journey with PlayStation, and I couldn't have asked for a better game to start if I tried. That's the first of this little mini-series of me talking about the iconic PlayStation franchises that define 30 years of PlayStation to me. I hope you join me as once a week we're going to look at a different franchise that means something to me and the wider impact of it. But for now, I'd love to know, what are your Crash Bandicoot memories? Do you have a favourite Crash Bandicoot game? Was your favourite Crash Bandicoot game even on the PlayStation? Or is it like Wrath of the Mutants where it just went insane despite still being fun? If you enjoyed this trip down memory lane, I'd appreciate you dropping a like. And like I said, if you want to stick around for this celebration of PlayStation franchises, I'd appreciate you doing so. We're going to be covering a different franchise each week right the way up until the 30th anniversary, so maybe consider subscribing. All my socials will be linked in the description down below, so if you have anything else for me, you can get at me down there. Otherwise, I hope you have a terrific day, play games, get gains, and I'll catch you in the next one.